Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with two very special guests. Our first guest today is Ananda Devi, and she's here to share with us her new book, Intimacy with the Infinite: The Truth About Life After Awakening. Now, Ananda is a powerful, heart-centered, Zen-style spiritual teacher. She has transformed the lives of hundreds of students around the world. Born in South Africa, she's a single mother of triplet teenagers. Her spontaneous spiritual awakening in 2014 shattered her conventional materialistic existence, leading her to give up a multi-million-dollar inheritance. Ananda, with her twin flame life partner, deliver the Rasa spiritual blessing via online sessions. She teaches that spiritual awakening is about vulnerability, integration, and love, so that you can become authentic and truly human. So let's welcome to the show, Ananda Devi.
Thank you, Marianne. I'm so excited to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
You know, what a joy it is to have you here. My goodness, once I got your book, I could not put it down. I think it's a journey that a lot of people go through, but they're not quite sure, first of all, how to even verbalize it, and a lot of times what to do with the information.
Tell me about it. It's not easy. That's all I can say. My journey has not been a normal journey, but it has definitely been worth it.
Oh, my goodness. Well, for our listeners that are new to you, why don't you share with us what your life was like before you had your awakening?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I lived a very conventional life. I'm a mom. I have triplets, three 17-year-olds now. And I was married. And when I had my awakening, things just really started to unfold. There was a radical overhaul of what I thought was true. And my life began to shift in ways I never even knew imaginable.
Well, and when you talk about your life before, I know you share a little bit about this in your book, where you talk about that you came from where most people would think it's like the family who has everything, you know, because a lot of times people equate financial abundance to, you know, overall wealth. But when we look from a spiritual aspect, a lot of times, while we might be looking like we're doing great on the outside, spiritually, we might not quite be there.
Well, yes, exactly. What emerged from it is that I wasn't really free emotionally and psychologically. Now I feel as if I'm a human being, whereas before I had wealth and security in the conventional sense, but I was living a role that I wasn't really being myself at all, but I didn't know it. So the pennies just started to drop one after the other. And it's funny, though, I didn't do anything on purpose. It's not like I signed up for it. I just became so totally aware that my life was very phony. And there is a price you have to pay for freedom, at least in my case.
Well, I think that happens for a lot of people. You know, you hear often where people say, you know, if I make X amount of dollars or get that promotion or attain whatever this thing is, then that my life will be peaceful and happy. But a lot of times that spiritual aspect will come and surprise people, because you had a spontaneous awakening. It wasn't, like you said, it wasn't anything that you planned.
No, it wasn't anything that I planned. It was so bizarre and so strange and so weird, and I became so incredibly lonely because it was the sense of separation was sucked out of me. And all of a sudden, all I wanted to be was genuine, kind of like feeling that I suddenly had or felt an emotional intimacy with my own self and wanted to express that to others. But a lot of people aren't really ready to embody or embrace authenticity or being genuine. And especially in the community, not that there's anything wrong with it. I mean, I really don't feel that people necessarily have a say in the matter. But again, as you were saying, we've become a very logical, rational-minded society, and we leave out the emotional body. We leave out what really matters, and that's compassion, love, all those things. The rational mind always stresses the opposite, whereas compassion and love really do go beyond the pairs of opposites. And that's really what awakened within me.
Well, in your book, you call yourself the reluctant mystic. And I think
very much
people can relate to that because, when I've had my spiritual awakening and I know other people I've talked to as well, when it happened, a lot of times we're like, okay, am I seeing what I'm seeing? Am I feeling what I'm feeling? Maybe I need a padded room. I'm not quite sure, So.
Yeah, I did sense that a lot, Marianne. I really thought I was going nuts. For a very long while, I suffered immeasurably. I felt very lonely. The best word to describe it is lonely.
So why don't you share with us a little bit of what your spiritual awakening was like?
Well, it was spontaneous, as you said. And what happened was, and I'm going to be brief, all of it is in the book, but when I was a teenager, really, is when strange things began to happen. I just didn't know what the hell they were. For example, something called sleep paralysis, where you're able to stay awake in deep sleep. Now, I was just terrified of that feeling of dropping into sleep and not being asleep, like I was aware. So I knew at that point that I was in my body and I was in my thoughts. But something else was going on. But instead of like letting it be, I fought it. I just didn't want it to be that way. I felt like I was dying. And it stopped. It stopped happening. I even took a couple of sleeping pills at that time just so I would be knocked out. And years later, when I began seeking, in truth, real seeking, reading the books and listening to satsang and, meeting with teachers, some teachers at least, I then began to meditate. And I talk about that in the book as well. I met a person and I did a TM course, and one thing led to another, and I then had those experiences again. Well, at least one really big experience like that again. And that was the catalyst to knowing my unity with the oneness that they speak of, the oneness that mystics speak of, where you just know I'm not a separate little somebody. There's something much larger going on. So I share an essence with everything and everyone. And that was a very fundamental knowing in me, even though I can still think like I'm Ananda and I have thoughts and a personality. It's something radical shifted. And a couple of weeks later or months later, I had a kind of a heart opening too. And that was also surreal. And then after that, there was just no going back. I kind of had to release everything that was false about my false self. It just fell apart. It fell apart. Life began to fall apart before it could like rebuild itself up again, And again, my book goes into so much more detail about it, and I think people will enjoy it from that perspective because, again, we all, even a mom, a person like me who's so normal and conventional, who like to go shopping and, all the normal stuff that used to, it can happen. And it in fact, it should happen because there's so much more. There's such a deep sense of being and loving and caring that happens when you wake up, and you really don't know until you do wake up. You're asleep until you have an awakening.
So why do you think this experience happened to you?
Oh, gosh, I've asked myself that question many times. A large part of the answer is going to have to be I don't really know for certain. But I was a student of something called the Kabbalah, which for many years, and I had done a lot of personal work. This was before my awakening. I had a wonderful teacher. She taught me a lot, and I used what I call in the book the mirror effect. In other words, every time I got emotionally triggered by anybody, I would look at what it is within me that was triggered. For example, if I have judgment, which I did, anything kind of self-loathing, anything that was mine, I owned it all. I didn't cast any of that blame outside of me for many years. And I think what happened was I prepared my vessel. And I think I can only think. And maybe because I'd emptied out a lot of my concepts and my judgments and my issues, not all of them by any stretch of the imagination, but some of them, enough to maybe invoke that kind of an experience, which was very surreal. I don't know. Maybe my astrology has something to do with this too. I don't know, Marianne, but that's the most I can think of. I think that sometimes.
Yeah. It's interesting because as we go through these spiritual journeys, that's probably a question I think a lot of people ask themselves. It's like, why did I have this spiritual awakening? Or why did that person have it? And that would be something I would like to obtain for myself.
Yes. Well, I think a lot of people think it's a quick fix, an easy fix. In other words, once I awaken, all my problems are going to go away. And I think that's the first concept that has to be dropped, because you're becoming an authentic human being and you're becoming very real, which means that if you had problems before, you're going to have to figure them out now more so than ever, because it's almost as if those parts of yourself that aren't really supposed to be there, they conditioned beliefs many of us hold and all of us have to really be looked at and have to be dissolved somehow. You have to be able to face it. So I think that, that's part of the issue with a lot of people that jump into wanting to just awaken without doing any work, like a quick mystical experience that's going to make you feel like you've transcended. Yes, you can transcend for a while, but it's not going to be everlasting unless you do the work that you need to do. And I think once you begin the work, then an awakening will be something very substantial that can last forever. It is forever.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting when we look at these types of journeys, a lot of times people who go through spiritual awakenings, it's not easier. They have to actually go through a lot of stuff. And I found that your book was, while being very honest, was also very comforting, because I think people, until just recently, when these things would happen, there's no information out there for them to kind of dive into, going, oh, wait a minute, this person's having the same experience or similar experience to me, so there's no comfort.
Yes, well, that's what I was really hoping for by writing my book. I hope just to give people an understanding about what it truly can mean. Now, I don't know if it's the same for everybody. I'm unique and everyone's unique. But in my particular case, and again, I do deal with a lot of students, I do know that it's not always easy. Sometimes we're enmeshed in relationships, families, conditioning. We don't even know how conditioned we really actually are. A lot of it is looking at our beliefs. We have so many conditioned beliefs that we have to really look at. And many of them are negative and very limiting. So and seeing that it's a belief is sometimes a big one, because we don't really investigate what is really going on here. So it's very much living on the surface, whereas as soon as you awaken, you're living in a very deep space. As you know.
Yeah, it's a very, fulfilling, and you talk about this in your book, while it's a difficult journey, it's also a very fulfilling journey. You also share in your book that you were born an empath. And at what age did you really discover that you had those talents and those gifts?
Empath, yes. Not until, my 40s. I was, and I had to really look into what was going on, because I recognized suddenly that I wasn't really around other empaths. In other words, empaths have a tendency to feel very strongly. They can feel what is going on in the world. Even you can kind of sense what somebody else is going through, and you really feel for them. And a lot of the times what happens is you introject. In other words, you take on other people's issues as if they're your own issues to try and help them feel better. And that doesn't really work, because unless a person really comes to you wanting to change, wanting to wake up, you can't really fix people. Empaths tend to think they can. So I had to really awaken to the fact that it really wasn't my job to fix anybody unless they came to me wanting to be fixed, and that such a small percentage of the population are real empaths. only 1 or 2%. I had no idea. You tend to think that the way you are is the way everybody is, but it's not the case at all. People are generally, kind of selfish. They can be kind of selfish. Mm-hmm. Empaths are not selfish people. They don't feel as much of a sense of their own self as they feel very entwined with other energies, what's going on around them.
Yeah, it's interesting when people and different souls come in with certain gifts, such as yourself, and how that, really kind of lays the path before them. Do you think that, and there's some belief systems that talk about that we choose the parents that we have because they're really our teachers and they give us a greater understanding of the path we're going to walk. Do you feel that your parents had that similar impact for you?
I've thought about that question too. On some level, definitely. I do believe that we choose everything that goes on some level. And in fact, sometimes it is through these incidences or human beings that really challenge you to in ways that you never thought that you don't necessarily think are fair or are just. And they love you as much as they can, but their love is limited if they're incapable of really understanding unconditional love. So in my particular case, I didn't feel I was loved unconditionally. And maybe I always felt I could love unconditionally, but that whole idea was something that I only woke up to, this idea of unconditional love. So I think my parents have been great teachers, sometimes in teaching me who I want to be versus who I was maybe born to be as far as they were concerned. They had certain ideas about how they saw their daughter progressing and that patriarchal kind of way of being raised and not really allowed to be my own person. And, the idea that if I were to inherit money, then I had to, be the person they wanted me to be. But to be my free, true self was something that they didn't like. They didn't like me being this way. I had to face it.
Well, it's interesting. You hear this with a lot of people where their parents tend to try to control them through money or assets or what have you, and if there's inheritance that's involved, and a lot of times walking your own path means leaving that behind.
Yes. In my case, I had to leave all of that behind because it felt like a noose around my neck. Mm-hmm. Not because they were nasty people, and I love them dearly, I always will, but because there was an underlying sense of basically fit in or ... And I guess I'm living the or now, no communication and no desire to know me and no interest in my life at all. I didn't sign up for that. It's what they seem to have want. So, realistically, I've just had to live it the way it comes up. I'm not trying to control an uncontrollable existence.
Well, in your book, you talk about the Enneagram, and I'd love for you to share with us how this has impacted your life and your work.
Oh, the Enneagram is such a wonderful, wonderful ancient wisdom. Some say it was even discovered in Mesopotamia years ago. And many psychologists such as Carl Jung and Fritz Perls and who was another one? I forget his name. Anyway, they developed psychological a psychology around the Enneagram. What it really is, it's a system of understanding your fixation, and a fixation is another word for an ego. So they're numbers between 1 and 9, and each person in the whole world has an Enneagram number, and that number is really pointing to the fixation. For example, the Enneagram type 1 is the perfectionist. The type 2 is the helper. The 3 is the performer. The 4 is the romantic. The 5 is the observer. The 6 is the loyalist. The 7 is the joyous. kind of divine child. The 8 is the challenge, and the 9 is the peacemaker. And that's the fixation. That's basically our ego, how we operate according to a fixation. So the fixation, meaning, for example, the perfectionist, the 1, if you're a perfectionist, your perfection or your need to come across as being a perfect person is both your blessing and your curse. It's a blessing because it's wonderful to be a virtuous, perfect person who strives for perfection, but it's not so wonderful when all you're doing is criticizing yourself and other people around you. So when you start understanding your type, your fixation, you're understanding how you work as an ego. Now, it's not your essence, obviously, because an ego and an essence are 2 different things. Your essence is, I like to think of it as that space within ourselves, which is changeless, is kind of like our nirvana. And then you have this essence, you have this fixation, which is an ego, which kind of is the area that we have to filter our essence through. We need it because otherwise we wouldn't be unique. But at the same time, it isn't who we actually are. So the more awakened you are, the more you're filtering through more of your essence versus this little I, this little person who is fixated on being seen in a certain way. So the Enneagram is just a beautiful way to use it as like self-inquiry, self-observation. You watch yourself being fixated on being the way you are, and you manage to change the things you don't like accordingly. But you have to become aware of those things first.
That's a difficult road.
Yeah.
To look at the shadow and, because a lot of people, they're like, hey, I'm great at all these things, but I got to look at the dark side of what these things also represent, can be a little tough for some people.
Yes. Well, shadow work isn't easy, but a lot of the time the shadow work is not necessary. For example, you can be an Enneagram type 8, what I am. So really what my shadow was my vulnerability. Because as a ego, as a little me, I came across as being very strong, invulnerable, not at all in touch with my vulnerability, my feelings, how I felt. I thought of my feelings as symbolically representing weakness. That if I was a feeling person who actually felt, for example, uncomfortable, sad, any feeling word, that was a sense of being vulnerable that I didn't want the world to see about me. So my vulnerability was hidden in my shadow. And each type has got something hidden in their shadow that they have to really look at. They have to allow it to surface so that they can embody that part of themselves. That's why the Enneagrams it's not as difficult as it sounds. It's actually it's a very real way of coming to terms with the work we each have to do. It's similar work, but it's just different in the sense of, what our fixation is.
Well, do you find that when people use the Enneagram, because I know you work with students all over the world, when they use it, the work that you have set forth with the Enneagram, that they're able to kind of reach a place of spiritual awakening for themselves?
Yes. I believe that they can. Yes, absolutely. If they're willing to do the work in all sincerely and honestly, and the desire is there. You have to have that absolute desire to awaken. If you have that desire, anything's possible, but it's got to be the number one desire. Usually the students that come to me are students that are really what I call ready to finish. They want this. They want to awaken. They want to get past the fixation, and they really are committed to doing their work. My job is to challenge the fixation. In other words, to point out their beliefs when they're having a belief that doesn't necessarily serve them, if they're being completely, truly honest with themselves, if they're trying to come across a certain way versus really, is that really their truth? And also about it not being about concepts and ideas that you get from books. You can kind of read a mystic's words and think that that's what it means, but it has to really be reflective of your own existential now experience. It's not about words. It's about living it. So often what students do is they don't take their own existential experience into account, whereas they really should, because that's what matters. They're the guru. They're the beingness. When they wake up to that notion, then things really begin to shift within them.
Well, and it's interesting, earlier in our discussion, you talked about like the second awakening you had was in the heart. And I'm finding it kind of dovetails nicely with our discussion here. Did you feel that when you had the heart awakening, it helps you to greater see what's going on with your students and just with people in general?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because compassion and love go beyond the pairs of opposites. So that kind of love, even though, and I wrote this in the book, there was definitely a time, a oneness, a sense there that was so surreal and impossible for me to maintain. I maintained it for a long time, but I wasn't operational in the usual way. I felt like I was in a love trance, one with everything. And even talking about it, which is something I really do, talking about it even is not very me. I'm a very actually practical person. So it was a massive shock for me. But yes, that love helps me deal with people because again, I feel that my essence and their essence or your essence is really my essence. So when I'm helping another person, I am helping myself, at least a part of myself. That's where you start to really tap into that universal love, the need to share, you know.
Well,
So it helped me in a big way.
oh yeah, I could see where that would be. And to really have a heart awakening, I mean, how profound is that? Because I think a lot of people walk through life not really understanding that they might have their heart closed until they have that really deep awakening that takes place.
Yes, I had a pretty closed heart. I think I must have. I mean, probably a little bit more open than most because I'm empathic. So I was a loving child, a loving person, but that was something surreal. I've never experienced. I mean, that felt like my entire heart chakra blew open. Something happened, and I haven't really been the same since.
That's a good thing.
Yes, exactly. I hope so. Yeah.
Well, we're glad that you had the awakening that you did because it's brought you on this path and you've helped people all over the world obtain their own awakening and travel their own path. What are
Yes.
what's some advice you'd like to give spiritual seekers or people who are out there kind of struggling with these kind of challenges and changes they're going through?
I would say we are living in a time of a mass awakening on our planet. And I would say that just to become as grounded as possible in your own sense of being, really let your experience be the guide and trust that beingness. And if necessary, get a teacher, get somebody who can give you honest feedback. It's so important. And journal. I always say to students, journal what you're going through, journal what you're feeling. And remember that everything's just, I always say this, information is not transformation. So we can read a lot and know a lot, but ultimately doing your work is essential in this time. Really, really, because we can't really change anybody else. We have no control over anybody else, but we can look at ourselves and do our inner transformation. And once that's done, things begin to fall into place. And I really want people to know, everybody to know, that they are perfect just the way they are, really. It's just getting past all our conditioned beliefs about ourselves, which is very much what this is all about. Feeling like I'm not good enough, feeling that expressing myself is not going to be, needed or not going to be, feeling like I have to be like somebody else, following like herd mentality. We're living in times now where it's very much also about an individuality, being unique, telling your story. Why not? It's our life. It's about living.
Mm-hmm. It's really profound, when we look at being authentic and walking our spiritual path. And once we start on that path, it feels like nothing else can really, there's things like, being a parent and a spouse and caring for your community. Nothing else really matters when you're walking this path. It's all about developing spiritually.
It is. But it's amazing, Marianne, because all of it is developing spiritually. Even the ordinary things like being a mother, and I say this to a lot of mothers, it's such a selfless role. when you are constantly putting other people's needs before your own. And so I think what's important is to develop the right consciousness around the things that you're doing. And even your being a wife or being a mother can become your practice. It's a practice in itself. The problem is that there are so many misconceptions about how it's supposed to look. But if it's happening, then it means that the way it's happening is the way it's supposed to be for you. And it's so different for everyone. And I always say to people, you can't really get this wrong. You just have to embrace it being what it is and live it, and really develop the right consciousness around it, not a robotic consciousness. Most people are behaving like robots. They just not really, in there now, in their moments. So a lot of that is about awakening to what's going on with you right now.
Mm-hmm. How true that is. Well, why don't you share with us about, because I know you have students all over the world, what are your programs like, and how can people get in touch with you to learn more about the work that you do?
Oh, thanks, Marianne. We have a website, and firstly, I am partnered with my a life partner who's amazing, and his name is Ramaji. And we have a website called rasatransmissioninternational.com. And whenever anybody goes to that website, they can read about everything that we do and everything that we offer, and they can book sessions with us if they so choose. Both of us do the same thing, and we even train other people to do the same work as us, because I'm very much about, and so is my life partner, about really getting more and more spiritual. And I'm saying the word teacher, but I don't really mean it as in teacher. No one needs a teacher, but maybe a feedback person. I don't even know. I use the word teacher because I don't know, I'm a friend, spiritual friend maybe. But so I train people to really do this work as well. Once they awaken, I believe that everybody is really capable and able to help other people get it. If I can do this, so can anyone. Well, that's my theory.
Well, and your book is a great roadmap to help people get to this place where they have a spiritual, kind of understanding. They have a roadmap for their awakening. You talked about the different things that you have. If they're looking to book a session with you, what does that look like as well?
Well, what happens is our sessions, usually what happens is a person books a session for like an hour and a half to 2 hours. That's usually the first session. And what we do then is we really sit with the student, and it's all about them. We listen at what experiences have they had, what are they going through, where are they at. What I do then is we allocate what we call a level of consciousness, which is really based on my life partner's model, kind of his ladder of consciousness. And it's a number, which sounds ridiculous, but I know, but that the number is really indicative of clarity. And there is a part of my book where I talk about a level of consciousness. How clear are you about your essence? Versus your conditioning and your beliefs and who you think you are. So that number really helps us evaluate where the person's at. And then what happens is usually every 2 to 3 weeks, the person comes back for what we call our mini sessions, booked 2 at a time. And every 2 to 3 weeks, they have another session. And what we find is their LOC steadily starts to rise. In other words, they're becoming more and more clear. They're starting to really look at their stuff, dissolve their stuff. I work with the Enneagram. I work with anything that's going on with them. And eventually they reach what we call LOC 1000, which is another word for enlightenment, but I don't like that word enlightenment. It's very loaded with an idea. I like awakened, and awakened. They become awakened. They get it. They wake up. And it's pretty incredible when that happens.
What a beautiful place to be. And they can also find your book on your website as well. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yes, there's a link to the Amazon .com wherever. Yes, it's on Amazon, and it's there. It's in the store area of our website.
Oh, that is so awesome.
Yes.
Ananda, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, Marianne, it's such an honor and a privilege, and thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Ananda. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Intimacy with the Infinite, The Truth About Life After Awakening. Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
If not me, then who? This ethos is driving the Travis Manion Foundation to empower veterans and families of fallen heroes to develop character in future generations. In 2007, Marine First Lieutenant Travis Manion was killed in Iraq while saving his wounded teammates. Travis's legacy lives on in the 5 words he spoke before leaving for his final deployment. If not me, then who? Guided by this mantra, veterans continue their service, developing strong relationships in the community and thrive in their post-military lives. Visit TravisManion.org and ensure the character of our nation's heroes lives on in the next generation. If not me, then who?
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with our next special guest, Brad Warner, and he's here to share with us his new book, Letters to a Dead Friend About Zen. Now, we've been lucky to have Brad on the show before. He's a well-known author, Zen teacher, punk bass player, filmmaker, and popular blogger who leads workshops and retreats around the world. In addition to his books, his writings have appeared on Tricycle, Lion's Roar, Buddha Dharma, and Alternative Press. He lives in Los Angeles, where he is the founder and lead teacher of the Angel City Zen Center. So let's welcome to the show, Brad Warner.
Thank you for having me.
What an honor it is to spend this time with you again. I know last time we talked about one of your great books as well, and I'm so excited that we get to talk about this new book. And my goodness, I am so curious, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, this is my 8th book about Zen Buddhism, so I've been doing this for a while. And I had done 2 books about Dogen, who was the founder of the sect of Zen that I study. And I thought those were good books and were kind of pitched to a popular audience, but I wanted to kind of move things back in a direction of getting into more basic stuff about Buddhism, because I felt there's a kind of a lack of knowledge out there about it. Even though there's tons of books, it still seems to be something you can talk about some more. But I didn't know how to approach it. And in the year 2014, 2 friends of mine, people that I'd known since high school, died of cancer, both of them within a couple of months of each other, very close. one of these people I was closer to than the other, and I'd actually visited him during his illness a couple of times and spent time with him. And I was on tour in 2019 in Europe, in Germany, when I heard that he died. And as I was sort of just processing this, I ended up writing. I was in a pizza shop in Hamburg, and I wrote this little entry into my diary, which had, not deliberately, but when I read it back, it was almost like a letter to him, like, "Oh, I'm so sorry you died, and here's all the things I wish I'd said," and so forth. And years later, 3 years later, I guess, when I decided to write this book about basic Zen, and I got sort of stymied on finishing it or making it work, I was looking through these old diaries to see if there was anything in there that could spark something. And I came across this diary entry, and I thought, well, that's an interesting way. I'm going to write this book about basic Zen as a series of letters to this friend of mine, starting with the first letter, starting with that diary entry as the first letter. So when you actually get the book, chapter 1 is, I changed it a bit to make it more like a chapter of a book, but it's almost verbatim. I'd say 80% of it's verbatim from my diary. I just typed it out right from what I'd written to in my diary that day. And the rest carries on in the same fashion. I decided I'm going to try to be as real about this as possible, even though I'm not actually writing letters to my friend. I know I'm writing a book, but I'm going to write them exactly as I would write them if I was really writing to my dead friend, and if he could really receive them, what I'd say to him. Then I went back and cleaned them up a little bit to make them a little more readable than they originally were. But basically, it's very straightforward. And it helped to explain all of this basic Buddhist stuff, because now I have to explain why it's important, and what it means in the real world. To somebody, this friend of mine had no connection with Buddhism or Zen or spirituality at all. He was one of my punk rock friends, so because I play in punk bands and things. So it's written like that.
Well, and so for our listeners that are new to your story, what actually got you interested in a Zen practice just to begin with?
Well, yeah, it was a long time ago. It was the early 80s, and I was in my teens, late teens. I was maybe even 20 by then. And I was interested in philosophy and things, because I'd heard, my parents had sat me down when I was about 15 or 16 and said, we have this terrible genetic disease in our family, and two of my aunts had already succumbed to it, and you could get it. And so I'm going, oh, that's great. So having this sort of specter around, I think, is what pushed me into being really into philosophy and things, because nobody in my family is really religious or philosophical at all. And I found this class at Kent State University called Zen Buddhism. And in the meanwhile, I was a part of the punk rock scene in Northeast Ohio at the time. And it was a very sort of, they used to call it politically motivated, but I don't think it was politically motivated in the sense of being partisan or anything like that. It was more like trying to get at something real, rather than just writing songs about driving your car and getting drunk and, I don't know what else you write songs about, sex and things like that. We were trying to write songs about real topics. And I loved that about the punk movement, and getting into actually questioning what life was about. When I found the Zen stream, I found out that these were people. I remember thinking they were the most punk rock people I'd ever met, and they were nothing to do with punk rock, but they were deeply questioning everything, including themselves. So that really got me started on that, and I've been practicing it ever since, and ended up becoming ordained and everything. Excuse me.
Well, and I understood that you met one of the wild men of Zen. I'd love for you to share a little bit about that with us.
Oh, well, there's two. I know both of my teachers, Tim McCarthy first and Gudo Nishijima second, were kind of, Zen is an interesting stream of practice and philosophy, because it tends to encourage people to go all the way with it and to be a little bit off the beaten path. And so there's a kind of mainstream Zen, and there's a sort of non-mainstream Zen. And the two teachers I met were definitely not in the mainstream of Zen, but they were both, perfectly legitimate Zen teachers. And Tim interested me because this was my first Zen teacher, and he was about 10 years older than me, which when you're 19 or 20 means more than it does now. But he was close enough in my age that he was relatable, and he was definitely not anybody's idea of what a Zen Buddhist priest should look like or act like. I don't think he was pretty out there. I mean, he wasn't a terrible immoral person, but he was sort of he didn't watch his language or anything like that. He was very real. And Nishijima Roshi, the teacher that I met in Japan, was also like that. He looked more like the standard issue Zen priest because he was Japanese, he was old, he shaved his head, he liked to wear robes, but he didn't like mainstream Zen at all. He used to call the mainstream Zen organization a guild of funeral directors who had no business talking about Zen at all because they didn't care and they didn't know. So those were my two teachers, which gave me a different sort of outlook on this whole Zen thing, I think.
I bet. I mean, because they sound so down to earth and something that's relatable. And I think for some people, when we talk about Zen, it seems so esoteric. It's like, what is that,
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the way it's come to us. And I don't know if it's particular to the West, but part of it is because the way it came to us in the West was through academics. It came mainly through D.T. Suzuki, who was not himself, as far as I know, ever a priest or anything like that, or he might have had some kind of ordination, but he was more of an academic who wrote a lot of books about Zen from that perspective and made it seem very intellectual. There was another Suzuki, though, who I like a lot better, who's Shunryu Suzuki, who came and started the San Francisco Zen Center, and he was an actual priest, and so I don't like the word Zen master, but he was, for lack of a better term, one of those. And his style was a lot more down to earth and basic. And I think that's really what Zen was always supposed to be. I think it's really us in the West who've twisted it into this sort of either very intellectual thing or this very sort of esoteric thing up in the sky. But that isn't what it's like on the ground, in the real trenches of being a Zen teacher, at least, before they all became funeral directors. But that's a whole other story there.
Yeah, it sounds like a whole other story. Well, and so for our listeners that might be new to Zen, when we look at Zen Buddhism, is that a religion? Is it a belief system? What is it?
Well, it's not a belief system. And for that reason, I'm reluctant to call it a religion. There are aspects of Zen that are definitely look like a religion, but I think it's more a sense of seeing what works about religion and using that to a slightly different ends, because it doesn't matter as far as the Zen part is concerned what you believe. So there's no sort of doctrine that you have to memorize and restate, and say, I believe that, this, that, and the other thing. It doesn't really matter. It's much more about the practice. So anybody, no matter what their belief, can engage in the Zazen, which is the kind of meditation we do. And it might affect how people in another religion feel about you, but as far as the Zen stream is concerned, it doesn't matter if you're, whatever you come to it with. So that's the way I look at it. Although, I can agree with other people who say it is a religion, although I always come down on the side of, if I have to say yes or no, I would say no, it's not a religion. But then I can go, well, yeah, in certain aspects, it's a little bit like a religion.
Yeah, it can have some of those qualities. Well, yeah. It's interesting because I think when people look at the Zen practice, just how it really impacts a person's life, there's a lot to be gained there.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's a lot. But one of the things that's kind of funny about it is my Gudo Nishijima, my teacher in Japan, his teacher was a guy named Kodo Sawaki, or one of his teachers. And Kodo Sawaki was very famous for this phrase. He would say, Zen is good for nothing. And that was the thing he said a lot. So promising great effects from Zen practice is kind of antithetical to Zen practice. So we tend to downplay the benefits of it. But the thing is, I've been doing it for 35 odd years, and I wouldn't be doing it that long and doing it every day if there weren't some sort of benefit to it. So obviously there is. But I think in order for that benefit to happen, you have to kind of sit without really concerning yourself too much with the benefit of it. It's sort of like exercise. If you're sort of obsessed with the end goal of how much weight you're going to lose or how many inches you're going to put if you're a dude on your forearms or whatever it is, you're not going to be able to get through the slog of just lifting those weights for an hour or being on the treadmill or whatever it is. So it's the same with Zen. You don't fix your eyes on the prize. You just get down to doing the actual practice and forget about any sort of benefits that are going to happen. And that's ironically how you get the benefit of it.
It's interesting how that unfolds. And and just like your book, which I found very fascinating, how you have it compiled, it's really kind of following you along on this tour that you were doing. And I don't want you to go through all of it because it's, obviously we don't have enough time for all that. Sure. But why don't you share with our listeners a couple of the things that really stood out to you during your journey as that you're writing about?
Oh boy. Yeah. Let me think. Well, the tour that I describe in the book, and I even kind of admit this in the final chapter, is sort of a compilation of several tours that I did. But most of the things, well, I'd say all the sort of events that happened in the tour actually really did happen. So, the part in the book where I got sick and had to spend several days in somebody's house in an apartment in Berlin because I was too sick to go on the dates that I had organized, and then they gave me a spinal tap to see what it was that I had. That really happened, and all of those things really happened. I suppose the thing that stood out among all of it was, of course, it's what sparked the whole book was the day that my friend died, because I was just traveling around, and of course Zen is addressing the great matter of life and death, as they call it. So I'm talking a lot about that to people and having individual meetings with people on retreats, and all sorts of things are happening. And meanwhile, I've got a friend actually dying back home, and I'm writing emails to him to try to sort of cheer him up a little bit as he's going through a lot of really difficult stuff. So that was the thing. It was all that's running all through the book. I kind of put that into every chapter, and because I think it's relevant. We all have to face our own mortality, but we don't have to obsess about it. You can kind of live your life as fully as possible, and it's going to end at some point. But living it right now, I think, is the most important thing. I don't know if that's an answer to your question. But it's an
It is an answer. You did fabulous with that. Well, and it's interesting because we look at just the Zen philosophy, and you talked about it having benefits. What are some of the benefits so our listeners can understand why this would be a practice they might want to involve in?
Okay, well, yeah, like I said, it's not what we normally do, but I can say it anyway. I don't think there's any harm. The first thing that happened to me when I was a student, I'm a university student. I had all this stuff going on in my life, and plus all the normal things you're going through at that age. And I did this practice, which is just basically sitting still for 20 to 40 minutes at a time and just trying to get into the, not trying to do anything with that, but just sitting still and holding still for a long time. And the first benefit was that the sort of fizzy buzziness of my brain didn't go away, but it started to settle down. And in fact, that's the main reason I kept doing the practice. Because when I first started, I wasn't real committed to it. This was just a class I took, and I was very impressed by the philosophy, but I wasn't like, I'm going to be a Zen Buddhist for the rest of my life. The thing is, every time I gave up doing the Zazen practice, then that fuzzy fizziness in my head started to increase again. And I know that for the first 2 or 3 times, I was kind of like, well, what's going on? Why am I so, I didn't really immediately associate it with the fact that I wasn't doing Zazen anymore. And then I'd get back to doing it and go, oh, this actually feels good. There's a book out now, which I have not read, but I like the title of it. I think it's called something like 10% Better, and it's about somebody's experience with meditation. And I think that's a good way to describe the initial feeling of meditation. And some people might go, oh, 10% better. I want to be, 90% better. But really 10% makes a huge difference. And that's how I kept going, because I sometimes say it's, to me these days, it's like brushing my teeth. I don't really think about, and you could sit there brushing your teeth thinking, yeah, I'm preventing gingivitis and tooth decay and so on. But I don't think anybody really does that. You just go and brush your teeth. And that's how I do my Zazen practice. I wouldn't feel right going out and having a day of interacting with people and doing stuff unless I'd done that first, because I know the difference between doing it and not doing it. And then of course there are more esoteric sort of spiritual benefits, but those tend to take a long time to develop. And probably for people just getting into the practice, you can talk about those things, but I think the more important thing is the initial practical benefit of just making your mind less of a, garbage dump.
Oh my God, isn't that the truth? Because when we look at all the things that we think about all day long, it could be really this kind of cycle of negativity and just stuff that's going through that we really don't need.
Oh, yeah. And, the thing about negativity is a lot of people, and I've met people like this, try to combat negativity by introducing positive thoughts instead. And that's a big thing to do. But I find that only works to a limited degree. And the best thing to do is in Zen practice, they tell you, it's not just your negative thoughts you're putting aside, you're putting aside all your thoughts. And that actually is really powerful, because you instead of holding on to the thoughts you like and, trying to drop the ones you don't, you learn not to hold on. And when you stop holding on, things actually get much, much better. You would think that it would just sort of even out, but actually things improve a lot if you can let go of even the positive thoughts that you have. Just kind of go, let that out and move on to the next thing, or just be quiet.
Well, I'd love to talk to you about attachment. Mm-hmm. And I think it's something that everyone deals with, or if they know it or don't know it, but especially if we're losing or have lost someone that's close to us, how do we deal with attachment then in that way?
Yeah, attachment is a funny thing, because you'd think a guy who's been studying Buddhism for 35 years would have come across this sooner, but I think it was like a year or maybe 2 years ago, somebody mentioned to me that the Sanskrit word that's often translated, or almost always translated, as attachment actually has another meaning, which is fuel. And I started looking into this, and some people are saying, well, that's the meaning maybe we should be paying attention to, rather than the meaning of attachment, and how the two words became one. That's how languages are. They're kind of weird that way. But what we're trying to do is, rather than, that attachment sort of has the connotation of love and, friendship and all of this other stuff. And people, when they hear be non-attached, they think, oh, I have to give up love and friendship and all of these things. But that's not what they're saying in the Buddhists who've been saying this stuff about attachment. What they're saying is, don't add fuel to things. So if you're angry, rather than trying to not be angry, you try to stop feeding your anger. And it's interesting how anger will starve to death. And the same thing with grief and all of these other things. If you stop feeding it, it just can't continue. So having love and affection and caring for people is not something that Buddhism is against. People get that idea sometimes. Because I certainly really loved and cared for the Marky, the dead friend in the book, is actually a composite of two people. I think I mentioned that, but I'm not sure. Anyway, it's not that I didn't love and care for them, because I definitely did, but also being able to open my hand, that's kind of the image that's often given by some Zen teachers, and just let that go. And if it's there in my hand, it's nice, but I'm not going to grab, and I'm not going to try to force it to be there. And that's been really helpful.
Well, and when we also look, at the afterlife too, when we have a belief system or a practice that talks about reincarnation, I mean, then we know that this isn't the end. There's more to come.
Well, sure. I mean, my own feeling about that is I tend to believe that, and a lot of people have misunderstood me as being a person who says that's not true. But I also feel like, it gets a bit speculative. So I do feel like the friends I've lost are still, they're not lost. They're not gone from whatever this universe is, because this universe can't be complete unless everything is there and there's no place else for anything to go. But in another sense, I try not to speculate too much about what might have become of them, because I realize, I just don't know, and I can kind of think about it, and it might be fun to think about, but it's not going to lead to a deeper appreciation of reality. I just kind of want to appreciate reality as it is, and not worry too much about what comes later.
I get it. Being in the present moment is concentration enough.
Yeah.
Well, and as you were writing this book, was there something that you kind of learned along your journey about yourself?
Well, sure. I mean, there always is. It's this kind of funny thing when my teacher kind of, I don't know, almost tricked me into being a teacher. I didn't have any aspirations to teach Zen. And then I had a teacher who said, you really should become a teacher and you really should ordain. And I was kind of, I think you're crazy. I don't think I should ordain. But I did it anyway because of his strong encouragement. And I found that kind of sharing this stuff with others is a way to learn about it myself. Even doing interviews like this, I find things out that I didn't know until they, pop out of my own mouth, and I go, oh, and I try not to feel too much pride of ownership in that, because I don't know what it is. But writing this book kind of gave me a sense of renewed my sense of the importance of this practice and philosophy, because I don't like to proselytize or preach, but I do feel like this has been a really, really useful way of approaching life, and a really, really useful practice. And I think I want to make it more available to others, without trying to sell it to them. And all of my books have been attempts to do that, but this one especially was kind of getting back to the roots of what this is all about, and seeing if I can express that clearly. And I keep trying. I think it came out pretty good, but
I would agree.
Trying anyway. Well, thank you.
I think you did an excellent job on this, because it is kind of this tough thing. I mean, people have their own path and their own way of thinking, and this might resonate with them, it might not. So there's probably like this really kind of fine line you walk as a friend, that you're really into this in practice, and you want people to be aware, but without feeling like it's being something that you're pushing on anybody.
Yeah, that's for sure. When the one friend who I visited was dying, I didn't want to be one of these guys who comes to a person who's dying and tries to push their religion on him, because my God, that would really ruin my day if I was, in the same position and somebody tried to do that to me. So finding a way to share this stuff is sometimes difficult, but you just have to be real with people, I think.
Oh, I completely understand that. Because you want to be present for them, and what they get is what they get along their journey. It's really, we're on our own journey for our own reasons,
Yeah, you really can't. People ask me all the time, like, I'm into this Zen practice, but my husband isn't, or my wife isn't, or my kids aren't, and I want to share it with them. And how can I do that? And I usually say, well, don't try. And I don't mean that in a sort of depressive way. I just mean, the more you try, the more it feels like you're trying. I think the best thing to do is just to do the thing you do and allow that. If there's anything that's going to sell a practice, it's going to be just quietly doing it yourself. And then people go, oh, they're quietly doing that for themselves. Maybe it really is real, because somebody who's trying to sell you a religion, that always looks suspicious to me. It always feels like, oh, you must not really believe it yourself if you're trying to sell it to me, because it seems like you're trying to get affirmation for your own beliefs rather than kind of just being with them.
I would agree. I think attraction is one of the main reasons that people look to diving into any type of practice. It's like, oh, do you see, this person over here looks so peaceful, and their life has really kind of, leveled out in some ways, where regardless of what's going on, they're really in this really peaceful place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's real powerful, and it can be expressed in such vastly different ways. Because I know Tim McCarthy, my first teacher, a lot of people who encountered him, especially who encountered him when I did, were just unimpressed by the guy. Like, he just seems like a weird guy who makes awful jokes all the time, and he didn't seem like the sort of Hollywood version of a Zen teacher, but I could feel that there was some sort of stability there that he'd found. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I want to see how somebody finds that kind of stability. And that's why I stuck with it.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, when you see that it's kind of like they're anchored into something. You're like, wait a minute, I want that.
Yeah, definitely.
And so what final thoughts do you want our listeners and our readers to take away from your book? I mean, because it really is you've got so many things. We haven't even touched on it, even a portion of it. It's such a great read. What do you want our listeners and readers to take away from it?
I never know how to answer a question like that, because it's sort of like, I think people will find in it what they find, and I guess the thing I want to put out there is that there is this practice and this philosophy that kind of is not, I shouldn't qualify it by saying kind of, it addresses a lot of the same issues that sort of regular religions address, like, what is the meaning of life, and why am I here, and all this other deep stuff. But it gives you a more practical way to deal with that, that's not dogmatic at all, that's very sort of open to anything. It just sort of asks you to say, okay, you want to know what life is about, here's something that we can do. We can sit on this stupid little cushion and be very, very quiet and let life happen and be as open to it as possible, and do that every day. And it's sort of, life itself reveals what it is to you without you having to kind of invent something around it or accept somebody else's interpretation of it. It just sort of, it sort of is presented to you, and you go, oh, I didn't know that was right in front of me. So I guess that's what I'd like people to take from it.
Well, I think that's a great thing for them to look at your books. And I mean, this isn't your first. You've done many books that people can dive into. But you speak at it, you talk about Zen in such a way that anybody could pick up and go, gosh, okay, I can resonate with this, Yeah,
that's what I try to do, because I feel like I didn't come to it expecting, I didn't come to it because I want to be into Zen and, or anything like that. So I'm trying to write to people who are kind of like that, who will find something out from it if it's actually presented to them in a way that doesn't try to clobber them over the head with it. I'm just trying to say, here's what it is.
Oh, I get that. Well, Brad, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn all about your books and all the stuff that you're doing?
Well, the best thing is the blog I have. It's Hardcore Zen, which is the name of my first book. So it's hardcorezen.info. So it's INFO info, because we couldn't get .com or .net or whatever. But I've got links from hardcorezen.info to everything else that I do, to the books, to the YouTube videos I do, and talks I give when I'm traveling, and all that other stuff is all there at hardcorezen.info.
Well, Brad, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Brad. It's always such an honor to spend time with you, and I love your books. Again, if you'd like to pick up Letters to a Dead Friend about Zen, it's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. Make sure to visit Brad's website at hardcorezen.info for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.